Following Antigonus's clear moves against the royal house, and his alliance with Cassander, son of the former regent Antipater, an opponent of Polyperchon, the current regent appointed by his father. Polyperchon and his allies looked to Eumenes, currently in Asia Minor, tenuously allied to Antigonus, to be their champion against Antigonus and his allies. They offered Eumenes the option of joining them in Macedon, or leading the royal army in Asia against Antigonus. Meanwhile, Cassander and Polyperchon were scheming against each other as they both tried to establish themselves over the Greco-Macedonian homelands. G'day and welcome back to the Research Project History. In this episode we're taking a look at part 2 of the Second War of the Diadochi, focusing on the events of 318 BCE. Before we jump into it, it would be really appreciated if you can like and subscribe to help the channel out. Thanks. Eumenes was in Cappadocia early in 318, with an army that he had been instructed to form by Antigonus. Eumenes having sworn an oath of allegiance to Antigonus as the condition of being released from the siege at Nora. However, the relationship between Antigonus and Eumenes was always tenuous and tumultuous, with both openly seeking personal advantage rather than just as true allies. Consequently, Eumenes jumped at the chance to better his position in allying with Polyperchon and the royal house. Quickly packing, Eumenes left Cappadocia with about 500 horsemen and over 2,000 foot soldiers, not waiting for any stragglers, because an army sent by Antigonus, led by Menander, was closing in to stop him from staying in Cappadocia. His speed of departure proved important, as when this army arrived 3 days later, they tried to chase Eumenes, but couldn't catch up, and departed back to Cappadocia. Making a forced march over the Taurus mountains, Eumenes and those with him entered Cilicia. Once there, Antigonus and Ptolemy, leaders of the Silver Shields, met him. The Silver Shields, a veteran unit of Macedonians, had been instructed by Polyperchon to serve under Eumenes. The 3,000 Macedonian Silver Shields added significantly to the skill and force Eumenes had at his disposal. Despite his recent change in fortune, Eumenes' position was still precarious. He was a Greek in command of a Macedonian army that, as a general rule, looked down on the Greeks. What is more, the leaders of this army had sentenced him to death in the past. Because of this, he was careful not to appear too eager for the command, and the wealth it might bring him. Initially refusing to accept the 500 talents offered to him to pay for the establishment and upkeep of his army, making as though he was only taking the role out of duty and loyalty to the kings and to the house of Alexander. However, having established his base, Eumenes then claimed to have received a vision in a dream of Alexander presiding over the affairs of the Greco-Macedonian world, a dream that he shared with the leaders of his army. In response to this vision, Eumenes proposed that, and I quote, "Therefore, I think we must make ready a golden throne from the royal treasure, and that, after the diadem, the sceptre, the crown, and the rest of the insignia have been placed on it, all the commanders must at daybreak offer incense to Alexander before it, hold the meetings of the council in its presence, and receive their orders in the name of the king, just as if he was alive and at the head of his own kingdom." Setting this up, the commanders, including Eumenes, offered incense to Alexander, and treated him as a god, after which they all sat around in front of the throne and deliberated on what course of action they should take, Eumenes feigning as though he was at an equal level to the other commanders, a move that gained him significant goodwill from among the leaders of his army, as well as the members of the veteran Silver Shields. The sudden change in Eumenes' fortune and subsequent shift in the balance of power in Asia did not go unnoticed by the other powers in the region, notably Antigonus and Ptolemy. Ptolemy responded to the threat of Eumenes by working to undermine the loyalty of the Silver Shields to Eumenes, repeatedly reminding them that all the leading Macedonians had condemned him to death, and that as such they should disregard his position over the royal army. He also sent messages to the garrisons at Sindhia and Cilicia, home of the royal treasure, encouraging them not to provide finance for Eumenes and his army. offering to guarantee their safety if they followed through with his request. Ptolemy's request, however, fell on deaf ears, as the knowledge that Eumenes had received his commission from Polyperchon as guardian of the two kings, as well as from Olympias, the mother of Alexander, was proof enough as to who they should listen to. Antigonus recognised the direct threat to his position that Eumenes posed, and like Ptolemy also sought to turn the silver shields against Eumenes. Picking his friend Philotas, he gave him a letter to deliver to the silver shields, and the other Macedonians with Eumenes. Along with Philotas, he sent 30 Macedonians, known for their ability to gossip and cause problems. Their mission was to meet separately with Antigonus and Ptolemy, the commanders of the silver shields, and convince them to join the plot by promising them great gifts and higher positions. Antigonus also instructed them to reach out to their acquaintances and fellow citizens among the rank and file of the silver shields, and secure their support through bribery. The mission was largely unsuccessful. Unable to persuade many, they did succeed in bribing Ptolemy, one of the leaders. In turn, Ptolemy tried to get his fellow commander, Antigonus, on board. However, Antigonus argued against the plot, convincing Ptolemy that it was better to support Eumenes rather than Antigonus. Antigonus argued that if Antigonus gained more power, he would take away their positions and replace them with his friends. On the other hand, Eumenes, being a foreigner, wouldn't dare to advance his own interests so far against the Macedonians, and would treat them as friends, protecting their position and possibly giving them more. The mission almost had another chance to succeed when Philotas gave the commanders a letter addressed to all the Macedonians. Leaving Eumenes out of it, the silver shields and other Macedonians met to have the letter read to them. In it, Antigonus had written accusations against Eumenes, and urged the Macedonians to seize and kill him quickly. He threatened that if they didn't, he would come with his entire army to wage war against them, and to punish them for failing to overthrow Eumenes. Upon hearing the letter, they were unsure what to do, not wanting to face the wrath of either Polyperchon and the kings, or Antigonus. Before they could reach a decision, however, Eumenes entered, read the letter, and urged them to follow the king's decrees and ignore the rebel Antigonus, managing somehow to convince them and save himself from immediate danger, while also gaining more favour with his army. Following this, Eumenes then ordered the soldiers to break camp, and led them to Phoenicia. He wanted to gather ships from all the cities and assemble a large fleet so that Polyperchon could control the seas and safely transport the Macedonian armies to Asia against Antigonus whenever needed. While these events were occurring to the east, back in Europe, Polyperchon the regent was dealing with issues of his own. Recognising the threat to his position if Cassander, his rival, and the former regent Antipater's son was able to be reinforced by both Antigonus and Ptolemy, as they held large regions and armies at their command in the east. Compounding this issue was the fact that many of the cities in Greece were ruled over by oligarchs loyal to Antipater, and could be likely to transfer their allegiance and, more importantly, mercenaries to Cassander rather than the regent. To help him confront this challenge, Polyperchon called together a council of his friends and other leading Macedonians. Their solution was to free the Greek city-states from the oligarchs and replace them with traditional democracies, in order to make the populations of those areas loyal to Polyperchon out of gratitude. To this end, they sent envoys promising that Polyperchon and his allies would work to re-establish democratic government, as well as to return those who had been exiled from their home cities under Macedonian rule, although Megalopolis, as well as some of the other cities, were excluded, as they were seen as being treasonous against Polyperchon and the kings. Beyond the other allowances in Polyperchon's edict, Athens had been singled out by the council for special treatment, likely to get the most notable of the Greek cities to side with them. And I quote, "The Athenians shall possess everything, as at the time of Philip and Alexander, save that Epirus shall belong to its own people as at present. Samos we grant to Athens, since Philip our sire also gave it to them. Thereby they restored to them what had been lost in the aftermath of the Lamian War. However, in Athens, Nicanor, an ally of Cassander, and commander of the garrison that had been installed in Munychia, near the port of Athens, following the Lamian War in order to keep a close eye on the Athenians, recognised the threat that Polyperchon's edict posed to his position. After failing to get the Athenian population to continue in loyalty to Cassander, he convinced them to wait to make any decision, as Cassander would be more willing to act in their best interests. In the delay, he covertly moved his men into the garrison, until he had enough to fend off the siege. The Athenians, discovering Nicanor's subterfuge, took umbrage, and reported his action to Polyperchon, asking for assistance. Meanwhile, in true Athenian fashion, they held frequent meetings to discuss the situation. While they were still in discussion, Nicanor, by night, moved out of Munychia and took control of the Piraeus and the harbour. This further incensed the Athenians, who sent prominent Athenians who had been friends of Nicanor, including Phocion, who had been appointed as leader of Athens in the oligarchy by Antipater, requesting that he restore Athenian autonomy in line with Polyperchon's decree. Nicanor responded that there wasn't much he could do, as he was under the command of Cassander, so they should direct their requests to him. At this point, Nicanor received a letter from Olympias, Alexander's mother, requesting that he follow through with the decisions made by Polyperchon to free Athens and to restore its democracy. Olympias, being a popular figure with both the Macedonians and the Greeks, was an imposing figure to oppose. Nicanor, with no assistance immediately at hand, promised to follow through with the requests. Although, when it came to keeping said promise, he displayed a brilliant streak of bureaucratic incompetence, and never actually followed through, thus keeping himself just about in the good books of all the various parties. While Nicanor was still dithering inside Munychia and the Piraeus, Alexander, the son of Polyperchon, arrived at the scene with an army. The Athenians were hopeful that he was there to restore their access to the port and free them from the garrison that was curtailing their freedom. However, notable citizens, including Phocion, who had benefited from their close relationship with the Macedonians, convinced Alexander that he should take control of the port region until after the looming war with Cassander was settled, as the port facility would be of great use during a conflict, an idea that was very much in line with Alexander's intended purposes in any case. While Alexander was negotiating with Nicanor, the Athenians discovered that Alexander was willing to double-cross them and take the port region for his own use. In response, they took matters into their own hands and removed the existing magistrates from office and replaced them with hard-line pro-democracy officials. Those who had been removed from office were condemned either to exile and confiscation of property or death. Those who were driven out of the city fled to Alexander's camp, hoping for asylum. Alexander received them warmly enough, and wrote letters of recommendation on their behalf to his father. The Athenians also wrote to Polyperchon, with charges against Phocion and his companions, and requesting that the regent use his forces to restore to them Munychia and the Piraeus. This left Polyperchon in a dilemma, as he was, like his son, hoping to have full control of the facility for the upcoming war, but also did not want to be seen as going back on his word, having decreed freedom for the Greek cities. As a compromise, he sent Phocion and those with him back to Athens to face a further trial, giving the new officials permission to carry out whatever judgment they saw fit. In the trial that followed, the accused were unable to even defend themselves. Such was the contempt they were held in by the public, who accused them of betraying their city while they had ruled in the oligarchy. With no defence deemed valid, they were to a man condemned to death, and after they had taken hemlock, their bodies were cast unburied beyond the border of Attica. Following this, Cassander, who had taken command of 35 warships and 4,000 soldiers provided by Antigonus, had sailed from Asia into the harbour, where he was greeted by Nicanor. Nicanor handed over the Piraeus and the harbour booms to Cassander, while keeping Munakia for himself, since he had enough soldiers to man the fortress. Meanwhile, Polyperchon and the kings were encamped in the region of Phocis, to the north of Attica. When news of Cassander's arrival in Europe reached them, he moved his camp into Attica near the Piraeus with 20,000 Macedonian infantry, about 4,000 allies, 1,000 cavalry, and 65 elephants. His plan was to besiege Cassander in the Piraeus and prevent him from establishing a foothold in Europe. But realising he was short on supplies and the siege not looking like it would be over quickly, he left part of his army in Attica under his son Alexander's command, in order to keep Cassander where he was, while not starving his own army in the process. Polyperchon then took the larger part of his forces to the Peloponnesus, to enforce his overthrow of the oligarchies at the city of Megalopolis, who supported Cassander and were governed by an oligarch set up by Antipater. With Polyperchon busy elsewhere, Cassander used his fleet to win over the people of Aegina, and besieged the Salaminians who were against him. He kept up relentless attacks, and with plenty of supplies and men, pushed the Salaminians to the brink. Just as the city was about to fall, Polyperchon sent a significant force of infantry and ships to attack Cassander and break the siege. Not wanting to engage in battle in the open against Polyperchon, Cassander abandoned the siege and returned to the security of the Piraeus. Polyperchon, eager to secure his position in the Peloponnesus, met with officials from various cities to discuss alliances, while also sending out envoys to order the execution of the oligarchic magistrates installed by Antipater and to restore democracy. Many cities complied, leading to the mass execution and forced exile of those who had thrived under Antipater. These cities, by and large, sided with Polyperchon. However, the city of Megalopolis in Arcadia remained loyal to Cassander. Willing to force the issue, Polyperchon planned an attack on the city. When the megalopolitans heard about Polyperchon's plans, they decided to bring all their property into the city from the countryside. Taking account of their resources, they found they had 15,000 men ready for military service, made up of citizens, foreigners and slaves. These they quickly assigned roles to as military units, work gangs, and groups to maintain the city wall. Some men dug a deep moat around the city, others brought timber from the countryside for an extra defensive wall. Some repaired weak spots in the wall, while others made weapons and prepared siege engines. Word had spread about the size of the royal army, and the large number of elephants which were known for their fighting spirit and unstoppable force, a looming threat that spurred on the efforts of the defenders. With everything hastily prepared, Polyperchon arrived with his entire army and set up 2 camps near the city, one for the Macedonians and one for the allies. He built wooden towers taller than the city walls and moved them to strategic spots, filling them with various missiles and men to launch them, pushing back the defenders on the battlements. His sappers dug mines under the wall and burned the supports, causing 3 large towers and several sections of the wall to collapse. Polyperchon's men poured through the breach, but the people of the city gathered themselves, some fighting off the invaders, using the difficult passage to their advantage, while others worked day and night to build a palisade and a second wall inside the breach. Thanks to the large number of workers and ample materials, the people of the city swiftly repaired the damage. They also used bolt-shooting catapults, slingers and archers to target the enemy in the wooden towers, inflicting many casualties. As night fell and many were either falling or getting injured on both sides, Polyperchon called his troops back to camp with a trumpet signal. The next day, he cleared the breach area to make it passable for his elephants, planning to use their might to capture the city. However, the people of the city, led by Damis, who had experience with elephants from his time with Alexander, outsmarted him. Damis used the elephant's brute force against them by setting up an ambush of primitive landmines made from sharp nails buried in shallow trenches, blocking a seemingly clear path into the city, while positioning many javelin throwers, archers and catapults from vantage points to the side. When Polyperchon launched his attack with all the elephants, they charged towards the city, but encountered the spike-studded timbers. With the spikes in their feet, the elephants were unable to either move forward or retreat. Meanwhile, the elephant drivers were targeted by missiles from their flanks, killing or wounding many, and rendering the elephants ineffective and out of control. The elephants, driven by the pain from the nails and the barrage of missiles, turned the way they came and trampled their own troops. Unable to force his way through quickly, Polyperchon switched strategies to a drawn-out siege, leaving part of his army again to continue the siege while he went off to handle other urgent matters. He sent Clytus his admiral with the fleet to the Hellespont to block forces coming from Asia into Europe, and to pick up Piraeus, who had fled to the city of Canoi. Clytus had sailed to the Hellespont, gained the allegiance of the cities of the Propontis, and received Piraeus' army. Nicanor, sent by Cassander with his fleet, also arrived, having taken over Antigonus' ships, now totalling over 100. The naval force met in battle near Byzantium, which saw Clytus victorious, managing to sink 17 of Nicanor's ships and capturing at least 40 more along with their crews, although the rest escaped to Chalcedon. Clytus, thinking he had dealt the death blow, thought the enemy wouldn't dare fight at sea again. But Antigonus, learning of the fleet's losses, came to the assistance of Nicanor and turned the situation around. He gathered more vessels from Byzantium by night and transported bowmen, slingers and light-armed troops to the other shore. In a pre-dawn surprise, they attacked Clytus' force, who were encamped on the land, causing panic. As the troops scrambled back to their ships, creating chaos due to the baggage and prisoners, Antigonus with his warships and sailors were ready to go. They launched a confident attack. Nicanor's fleet, setting out at night, struck at dawn, catching the enemy off guard. They rammed and disabled many ships, capturing most with their crew, except for the one carrying Clytus. Clytus fled back to shore and tried unsuccessfully to reach safety in Macedonia, but he was captured by Lysimachus's soldiers on his way and executed. Antigonus, having dealt a severe blow to his enemy Polyperchon in the west, gained a great reputation for his military genius, and having cut off contact between Polyperchon and Eumenes by land, and in control of the seas, Antigonus could now turn his focus to his ambitions in the east, in events that we'll look at next time. Meanwhile, in Europe, Polyperchon had lost respect due to his failure at the siege of Megalopolis, causing most Greek cities to switch allegiance back to Cassander and the Antipatrid family. The Athenians, with Munachaea and the Piraeus still firmly in the control of Cassander, had a leader suggest that they could negotiate with Cassander. Initially, there was a lot of debate, but after careful consideration, they unanimously decided to send an embassy to Cassander to negotiate terms. After several rounds of meetings, it was agreed that the Athenians would keep their city, territory, revenues, fleet, and everything else, and become friends and allies of Cassander. Munachaea would remain under Cassander's control until the war against the kings ended. The government would be run by those with at least 10 minor, and Cassander would appoint one Athenian citizen as the city's overseer. This turned out to be a lucky break for Athens, as Demetrius of Phalerum was selected, and he oversaw a decade of relative peace for the city. After his victory with the assistance of Antigonus over Clytus and Polyperchon's fleet, Nicanor sailed into the Piraeus with his ships, proudly displaying the beaks, the battering rams on the front of the ships, as the trophies of victory over the captured ships. Initially, Cassander was pleased and impressed with Nicanor's success. However, he soon noticed Nicanor's growing ambition, and the fact that he was still garrisoning Munachaea with his own men. Suspecting treachery and rather safe than sorry, Cassander decided to simplify the command structure and had Nicanor assassinated. This brings us towards the end of 318 BCE. In the coming period, Antigonus moves his forces to the east, and Eumenes, cut off from Polyperchon, moves further east in response. That's all for now, and we'll see you next time when we look at the events of the Second War of the Diadochi in 317 BCE. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to help me out, and leave any comments that you might have. Cheers, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.